A lot of the tennis players are like, ew, pickleball. What is your perspective of the sport of pickleball?
I think it's great. Anything that can get people out, get them a little exercise. Lord knows we all need some of that. And we also need it for our brain.
You know, you've brought up your brother, John McEnroe. In 1991, you actually faced him in an ATP singles final. Was that match emotionally harder than any match against another player because of like the personal stakes?
You know, I think it was more emotionally harder for my brother than for me.
Do you think that tennis these days has lost some of that raw individuality? Or like, would a player like John even be allowed to exist in today's media environment?
Good question.
Welcome to another episode of the Spout podcast. I'm your host, Tamara, and today we have former tennis star, now star tennis analyst, Patrick McEnroe with us. How you doing today, Patrick?
I'm doing well. It's a little couple of Wi-Fi issues here in my home front, which I think we've resolved. So I'm very happy to be on with you. Thanks for having me.
Of course, yeah. Oh, now Wi-Fi star, I guess we could say. You can fix your Wi-Fi in the blink of an eye. We love it.
Exactly.
Well, you've lived almost every possible life in tennis. I mean, player, Grand Slam champion in doubles, Davis Cup captain, broadcaster, and now you're a leader shaping the next generation. So when you look back at your journey, what era taught you the most about the game and about yourself?
That is a very good question. I'm not sure I can give one specific answer to that because, as you said, it's sort of run the gamut for what I've done in tennis. You know, starting out hitting against the wall when I was 3 years old with an oversized racket, which was too big for me. You know, to playing in college at Stanford, which was a great experience. Certainly being the Davis Cup captain for 10 years. And helping lead the team, which, you know, mostly it's done by the team, by the players, to win the title. But really that whole journey as being, you know, me and my brothers, we obviously love tennis and we've been very successful with our profession in tennis. But we also played a lot of other sports as kids and we loved playing team sports, and tennis being an individual sport, you know, you don't always get that part of it. So I was able to get it in college tennis. And most importantly, my brother John and I were able to get it in the professional level through the Davis Cup. And our parents were sticklers for a couple of things: education, you know, being fair tennis players, and also if you ever had the opportunity to represent your country, to do that. We took a lot of pride in that. My brother's, you know, the greatest Davis Cup individual player that there's ever been in this country. And I was lucky enough to play a few matches. But for 10 years as a Davis Cup captain is probably where I learned the most about leadership, about how to spur people on that are different from yourselves. You know, luckily I was dealing with players that were a lot better than I was as a player, but it's really about how to push the buttons and get the most out of people that you're working with.
What other sports did you play?
I played a lot of soccer as a kid, loved baseball, played some basketball rather unsuccessfully, but my favorite sport to play, probably other than tennis, was baseball. I was a pretty good pitcher. I played the shortstop. Loved soccer. Actually, both my brother and I played on the soccer team at our high school, all through high school, which was, you know, when I tell parents that of high-level tennis players now, they look at us like we were crazy. What? You played another sport, you know, even through high school? So I think those sports not only helped us as athletes, but also helped us become, you know, more well-rounded individuals as opposed to just being in an individual sport like tennis.
I love that you said that you started playing when you were 3 years old just by hitting the ball against a wall. Do you think that, like, in order to have the level of success you've had as an athlete and the accomplishments that you've had, that it has to start that early?
Well, luckily it doesn't, because actually my brother didn't start until he was 8.5, and that's when he started playing tennis. And it just happened by chance because the neighborhood my parents moved to had a small tennis club. So he decided, well, I'll try tennis because he played all the sports. But you'll find that most players that make it to the professional ranks, or even become high-level college players, usually start, I'm going to say, you know, around 4 to 6 years old. At least they start doing it, you know, consistently. It doesn't mean you do it every day. And we would recommend actually that you don't do it every day until maybe you get to about your early teenage years, or maybe 11 or 12, to break it up while doing other sports, because I think it helps your overall athleticism. And not to mention, you know, it's a long journey to become a successful tennis player at whatever level you're at. So you don't want to burn out, and you can burn out if you focus too much on it too early.
That's so true. You also, you brought up your brother, John McEnroe. In 1991, you actually faced him in an ATP singles final, which is one of the rare brother versus brother finals in tour history. So just out of curiosity, was that match emotionally harder than any match against another player because of like the personal stakes?
I think it was more emotionally harder for my brother than for me, because he was always obviously a much better player than me. And at that point, he was at the end of his career. I was sort of in the middle of my career, which is really the only time that I could give him a match, because I'd played him a couple of times earlier when I was younger, and he was sort of in his prime, and he just beat the you-know-what out of me. So this one time, I actually had a chance to win the match. But I must say, it wasn't like a huge desire of mine to beat my brother. My brother, I looked up to, and he was, like a mentor to me, and he really helped me in my whole journey as a player, knowing that he was a much better player. But I think it would have hurt him a lot more than it would have made me happy. So at the end of the day, it was a close, very competitive match, which he won in the third set. And I have to say, I was pretty happy with that. It wasn't a huge desire of mine. Just like, I got to beat my older brother. I beat him in doubles a few times, and he didn't take that too well either.
Yeah. You guys are much kinder than me and my brothers. We would be like, those would be bragging rights until we were, 90.
Yeah, that does happen. We have another brother that's in the middle of us, Mark McEnroe, and he didn't play highly competitive tennis, but he was a very good player in his own right. But he was in the middle, so he was sort of close to John and close to me and closer to me in age. So he was sort of the bridge. He was like the middle guy, kind of playing both sides of it. So that was his job.
I love that. John changed tennis forever, and not just with his skill, but with his personality, his passion, his willingness to challenge authority. Do you think that tennis these days has lost some of that raw individuality? Or would a player like John even be allowed to exist in today's media environment?
Good question. We were talking today at our tennis academy that that his name on it, and I help him run it here in New York City. About, he's like, maybe I should go on social media, because he's never done it, throughout his whole life. He's sort of been like, no, I'm not going to do that. The bottom line is he would still be a high level tennis player. The other stuff that came in some ways maybe actually would have been better, because I think a lot of the stuff that went on, the controversies that surrounded him about the line calls and him getting upset, now with all the electronic line calling, it might have calmed him down a bit. So he may have actually been a better player. But, part of his drive was that emotion, that intensity that he brought to the court and to the match. So at the end of the day, I still think he'd be really good. He'd probably still get to number one in the world, because I think players in other eras, they learn how to adapt and change. So I think he'd do just fine in this era. But we certainly, tennis can always use some personalities. It's a star-driven sport. It's driven by personalities and by rivalries. And we've been lucky enough to see some great rivalries that I've been able to broadcast for many years. Federer, Nadal, Djokovic, and now you've got Carlos Alcaraz and Jannik Sinner, who are two great young talents that are really elevating the game.
1,000%. I was actually going to dive into that a little bit. I mean, you've had this unique perspective of watching tennis evolve from the Agassi, Sampras, McEnroe era into the Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic era, and now, as you mentioned, into the Alcaraz and Sinner era. In your mind, how has the game of tennis actually changed in between those eras?
Yeah, great question. I mean, it's actually gotten, I call it the tempo of the game, of the match, of the points, has gotten quicker as the technology has improved. The players can swing harder and essentially have more control because of the racket technology, because of the string technology, and because players over time just learn how to get better. It's a learned skill, and even how we train our kids at our academy, you train them in a different way moving forward because you see the game evolving. So more kids are saying, hey, I could try that shot. Look at these crazy shots that Carlos Alcaraz is hitting. He's making them look like they're fairly easy and routine. Now they're not, but a lot of the younger kids coming up will try to emulate that, and they'll try to compete with that. So I think that the biggest change is the speed of the game. So that means the players are hitting most of the time a little bit harder, maybe with a little more spin, and they also have to then move quicker. So they have to be quicker to the ball. But when you talk about really the X's and O's of tennis, the game hasn't changed that much. it just continues to speed up and evolve. And then the players have to do the same with it. Like, my brother and Borg, if you watch their matches, you go on YouTube and watch it, which I do all the time. I'm a tennis geek. They look like they're playing in slow motion, but every once in a while you'll see their speed. And if they had to do that point after point, like Sinner and Alcaraz do now, they would be able to do it in the modern age of tennis too.
Interesting. You've mentioned this a couple of times, but you now serve as president of the International Tennis Hall of Fame, and you work closely with the John McEnroe Tennis Academy and the Johnny Mac Tennis Project. You're helping to develop young players and expand access to tennis. So can you just tell me a little bit more about that?
Sure. I was just at our academy just a few hours ago, and we have kids coming in from the local communities in the schools area in Harlem and the South Bronx and Queens that we give the opportunity to just see tennis. And then we have the opportunity for them to play consistently through our excellence program. And then we have a program within the John McEnroe Tennis Academy where we scholarship kids that normally wouldn't be able to get the opportunity to continue to improve their tennis. Maybe one day become a pro like me and my brother did. Maybe just get a scholarship to go to college. We had our college signing day earlier this week, for all the kids that are going off to play college tennis. So that's always a very proud moment for us at the academy, for the parents of those kids. We have one kid named Dylan. He started in our program 10 years ago when he was in second grade. He never played tennis, and he just came through his school. And then he kind of got hooked. He got into it. He went into our excellence program, and now he's going off to college to play college tennis. So that's kind of cool to see the whole the way their journey evolves, and the parents are super pumped to be there. And you mentioned my role as the president of the International Tennis Hall of Fame, which does so much to celebrate the history of the game, the Hall of Famers of the game, of which my brother is one of them, and also try to inspire youth to find your own greatness. We have a program called Be Legendary, which we go to kids all over the world at tennis events, and we tell them stories about the Hall of Fame, about tennis, about history. And we encourage them to be their own legend, to be their own person to find their greatness, whether it's in tennis on the court or off the court.
I love that. You mentioned, this kid Dylan, and just kind of like looking for greatness. What qualities do you look for today that kind of signal that someone has that greatness in them, and maybe they could be a champion and potentially a transformational figure in the sport?
Yeah, mostly that's going to come down to your genetic, physical abilities, to be that level of a player. And then you obviously have to train that. You have to be dedicated to that. So if we see that sort of diamond in the rough, you obviously, give a little extra attention and make sure that you give that kid all they need, because as I said, it's a long journey from, maybe having talent at 8, 9 years old till 10, 15, 20 years later, still be motivated, still want to play the game. But I think the one thing I look for more than anything, other than just the physical ability, right? And the speed, the ability to time the ball, those are the things you can see pretty quickly, would be is a P word, the passion. The passion for tennis, the passion for being in a sport where you're going to lose a lot, you're going to miss a lot of shots, you're going to experience failure a lot. And how do you recover from that? What's your resiliency level? Not only within like each match you play or each practice you play, but just as a person. So I think tennis, for whatever level you get to, if you're serious about it, teaches you a lot of really important skills that will help you big time in life, whether it's, again, playing tennis or doing something completely different.
I love that. Some of the skills that you mentioned are obviously in athletes like Roger Federer, who is often described as the most beautiful player, or Nadal as the fiercest competitor, Djokovic as the most mentally unbreakable. So from your analyst perspective, which trait, would it be technical elegance, physical dominance, or psychological resilience, is ultimately the hardest to beat?
Well, that's a tough one. Djokovic has been the toughest guy to beat because he combines all of those things. They all do. These are three of the greatest to ever play the game. Roger made it look easy because of the elegance he brought to the game, the beauty of just watching him play. Nadal's intensity, his focus, his physicality was something that we'd never really seen at that level in tennis. And Djokovic sort of combines them all. And I love what he said in one of his interviews he's done in the last couple of years when someone said, well, you're mentally tough. You've always been mentally tough. And he stopped the interview. He said, no. I haven't always been mentally tough. That's something I had to train myself to do. Just like I trained my forehand, I trained to make my serve better, to do all the technical aspects of becoming an all-time great, but also the mental side of it. So when I look at him, to me, he's the entire package. I mean, again, you're talking about arguably the three greatest male tennis players that have ever picked up a racket, all within the same era. But I would put Djokovic at the top of that list because of how he combined all of that. And obviously his record speaks for itself.
Yeah, I mean, he now holds the all-time Grand Slam record. He's beaten Federer and Nadal head-to-head more often than not. So I feel like this is kind of a constant argument based on people's favorites. But in your mind, does that definitively make him the greatest tennis player of all time?
To me, it does. I mean, on the male side, obviously, you could argue for Serena Williams. On the women's side, Steffi Graf, who finished with 22, and she didn't play as long as either Serena or Novak Djokovic. So if she had played another 5 years, who knows what she would have had. But longevity is part of it. But I would put Djokovic, yes, at the top of the list because of what you mentioned, the head-to-head against Federer and Nadal, and the scope of his wins, not just in the majors. Total majors obviously counts. But he's also won the most of what we call Masters Series events, which are the events just below the majors. And he also has won the most if you combine the different surfaces, indoors, clay courts, hard courts, and so on, grass courts at Wimbledon, of course. So he's got the best scope of wins. And the fact of the matter is he's about to turn 39. And he's still playing at the very top of the game. Just beat Sinner in Australia. It was, to me, one of his greatest wins ever, even though he ended up losing in the next match to Alcaraz in the final. The fact, you talk about passion, and doing it, because these two guys have dominated him the last couple of years, these two young bucks coming along, and he still has the passion to go back to work and try to say, okay, I want to find a way to try to keep competing with Sinner and Alcaraz. Pretty remarkable.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about Alcaraz and Sinner both, and they're both such remarkable stars, as well as Djokovic. But for the two younger guys kind of coming in and creating a bunch of new fans for the sport, what is it about their game and their personalities that you think is making them such standouts?
Well, Alcaraz, you got to put at the top of the list. Not only, well, now he's got considerably more majors at the moment than Sinner. But the way he plays, he plays with such a joy. He plays with an incredible variety of shots. I mean, he hit shots that we didn't even think were possible, okay? And he does them with regularity. He sort of elevated Federer obviously had the beauty and the slice and, could come to net. This guy not only he's got the explosiveness of Nadal, the speed of Djokovic, and the shot-making ability of Federer, all rolled into one. So, I do this at our tennis academy all the time. Before I'm leaving for Australia, I said, who's going to win it? And, some of the kids say Sinner, but most of them say, oh, they love Alcaraz because of his personality. You asked me earlier about my brother. Do we need more personality? This guy loves to be on the tennis court. He loves to play the game. During the final of the Australian Open that just happened, he lost the first set to Djokovic. And my brother and I and Chris Fowler are sitting in the commentary booth. We kind of look up. We call it the bunker. So we kind of look it up. But the players can see us when they go back to get their towel. And Alcaraz, in every match that we covered, would look at me and my brother and would laugh. And he'd look around. And now he was losing in the final. He wasn't playing that well. And he kind of looked over at us and he's like, well, the point I'm making is that even when he was down, playing in one of the biggest matches of his career, right, a final of a major, he still has the wherewithal to not just communicate with us, but to communicate with the crowd, with the people there. He's like a showman. He's like a Broadway star and an incredible athlete all rolled into one. Yeah.
And I think that's what makes him so lovable, too, as a player. And just like he's got these new fans all over the world, it's really fun to watch him play.
It's fun, and he's bringing a lot of kids into the game, which is important. Sinner's a great player, but he's a little more mechanical in the way he plays, and his personality is different. Which Bjorn Borg was very quiet, and he used to play against my brother, and he would be very stoic. So you have to be who you are, and I find that tennis players, their game sort of model in a lot of ways their personality. How are they outgoing? Do they go for shots? Do they like to come to the net? They more reserved. Sinner's a little bit more of a reserve guy off the court, but he couldn't be nicer and he couldn't be classier guy. And he's trying to develop his game so that he can, continue to compete with Alcaraz tournament in, tournament out. But this guy's awesome too. He's won 4 majors already. So he's taking the ability to the ball striking ability from the ground to another level off both wings. He just doesn't quite have as much variety of shot as Alcaraz does, but boy, he hits the ball as well off the ground strokes that I've ever seen.
Who else do you kind of have your eye on in this new wave of tennis stars?
Well, I'm always looking at our American players because we've got quite a few really good ones, particularly Ben Shelton, who's now the #1 ranked American, played college tennis. His dad was a coach there at University of Florida. He played football as a kid. So my brother and I love his story, love the fact that he played other sports before he concentrated on tennis. Taylor Fritz, a veteran. I mean, this guy just continues to knock on the door. He's been at a U.S. Open final. You've got Sebastian Korda, you got Tommy Paul, you got Francis Tiafoe. We got a bunch of players that are really, really good. The question is, can one of them get to the promised land? As far as a casual fan, to me, they're already amazing players. But for the casual fan, they're like, hey, they got to win majors to move the needle for the casual American sports fan. I think Shelton's got a chance. Lerner Tien is another youngster, a lefty from California who's just come onto the scene in the last 2 years. He's awesome. Alex Mickelson. And there's some players from other countries. João Fonseca from Brazil, Jakub Menšík from the Czech Republic. So there's guys coming up, and there's probably a 16 or 17 or an 18-year-old out there we don't quite know yet that's watching these guys that says, maybe in 2 or 3 or 4 years, I can compete with these guys. Because I do think that tennis needs another couple of players that can get in that mix. You had Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic, but you also had Andy Murray, who won multiple majors, Stan Wawrinka, Juan Martín del Potro. So a lot of players that were in the mix pretty consistently. I think tennis needs that moving forward for the next 10 years or so.
Yeah, I agree. You mentioned Serena Williams earlier. From your vantage point, what made Serena psychologically different from everyone else? And do you think we'll ever see another athlete like her dominate the sport in quite the same way?
Well, you never say never, right? Because we didn't think that after Pete Sampras retired and, Steffi Graf. Serena's one of a kind. I mean, she's 1 in a billion because of obviously her incredible technique in her game. The serve was beautiful. All her shots, technically were incredible. Maybe she would say the backhand slice, even though she worked on that later in her career. But her toughness, her competitiveness, her speed, her desire, I mean, it's just the entire package of what she brought to the table. She was just so focused when she went out there to play a tennis match. And that, to me, is what separated her. As I said, you got to have all the genetic tools as to become an all-time great. That's a given. And she had all those things. But the desire to go out there and dominate, the desire to go out and show her stuff out there consistently. And she had to deal with a lot of tough things, being African-American, playing a mostly white sport, kind of crashing the party in the way that she and her older sister did, was pretty remarkable. They had to deal with a lot of crap, throughout their career. So I admire her for the way she dealt with that, how she started out as this teenager trying to kind of chase down her sister and then becoming this all-time great and someone that's been incredibly successful off the court as well because of her, her smarts, her personality, and her charisma.
Yeah. Another sport that's getting a lot of headlines right now is pickleball. I saw a video of Carlos Alcaraz and Taylor Fritz playing pickleball together. So I play tennis. I actually was telling my producer that I have a class at 4:30 today. I'm very excited for, but I've also started playing pickleball, and I've noticed that there's this a lot of the tennis players are like, ew, pickleball. So watching Alcaraz and Fritz play it, I think it's so funny. What is your perspective of the sport of pickleball as a decorated tennis player?
I haven't played that much. I'm actually recovering from a shoulder surgery I had for my rotator cuff, so I'm hoping to get back on the tennis court. I played pickleball a few times. I think it's great. I think the more people can get out there and play a racket sport, and I know they call it a paddle, right, in pickleball. I made that mistake because I did a couple events for them on television. No, you can't call it a racket. So I think it's a cool game, and it's very much, to me, something that anybody can pretty much do at any age, which is why it's so popular, right? Tennis is a very difficult game to get competent up enough at to make it actually worthwhile, right? Because if you never played tennis and you try to pick it up in your later years, or you can't hit the ball, you're not going to have that much fun playing tennis. Pickleball is a little simpler. Obviously, at the highest level of pickleball, those players are amazing. So those professional pickleballers would beat up on us professional tennis players in pickleball. But there are a few that have made the transition. The main one being Jack Sock, who was one of the great doubles players and a very good singles player in tennis. And he's become one of the top pickleball players in the world because he's got unique skills, that translate to pickleball. So anything that can get people out, get them a little exercise, Lord knows we all need some of that. And we also need it for our brain. It's good for the brain to get out there and do something positive.
Yeah, I recently saw Andre Agassi talking about it and how he feels like he has a new lease on life because he's now playing pickleball, which I thought was interesting.
Well, he's super into it. Like he played in some of they call it the pickleball slam, which my brother played in a couple of them. My brother's one of those guys who's sort of, he's not so sure about pickleball. He's like a tennis old school guy.
Sure,
but he did play it a few times and he's pretty good at it. But Andre's really into it. James Blake is another guy who works with us at ESPN. Sam Querrey played it. So a lot of the ex-tennis players get into it, and like I said, we can get reasonably good at it pretty quickly because of our hand-eye skills. But whether or not we can become like professionals, that's a whole nother story.
Yeah. What are you most excited about for tennis in the coming years, especially with the Olympics coming up?
I'm excited to see how the game, because you watch it and you're like, how can these players get better? How can the level of the game get better? And it seems to always happen. Every 5, 7, 8 years, you see like a player come along that's like, okay, I'm going to change the dynamics of the game. So I'm interested. I'm really interested to see what this new breed, these kids I mentioned right now, there's kids that are 15, 16. I mean, even our best kids at our academy, I'm not going to say they're going to be professionals, but they're trying to do things that we're seeing the pros do that they wouldn't have even tried 10 years ago. Yeah. So that to me is kind of opening up the scope of the game to making it more exciting, and more fun to watch. I completely disagree with people that say, oh, back in the old days when everyone was serving and volleying at Wimbledon, it was much more exciting. I challenge anyone to go out there and watch Alcaraz play tennis on grass, or Federer in his prime, and go back 40, 50 years and tell me that was more exciting to watch. Now, maybe you love the players, the personalities, but the game itself. And of course, tennis thrives at its highest level when you've got this incredible level of play and also level of personality and charisma that those best players bring to the table. And there's only a few that move the needle. Agassi was one in my days at ESPN. Serena was another. Certainly Federer and Nadal, that rivalry especially. Those are players that the casual fan says, I want to watch that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time, Patrick. It's been really nice picking your brain about tennis. I feel like I'm going to go to the court now and pretend like I'm a pro.
I'm fired up. I wish I could be out there to give you some tips, but it sounds like
honestly, I wish too. Next time you come to LA, I will take a lesson 1000%.
Sounds good. Have a good time. Enjoy it. Take care.
Thank you.